Cool. Are we good?
I think all the teams who do consent should just like say once again so that the consent is on the recording itself.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
We
yeah.
can
In the sense that,
recording.
We will let you know before our speeches.
All right, assuming that's all good, I will endeavor to put timestamps in the chat, but obviously time yourselves, and time on the speakers. Without further ado, I welcome the Prime Minister to begin this debate.
hello, can everyone hear me okay? Cool. We didn't expect to get here, but I'm really happy. And this is a good motion. I like this. When the land of the free conducts illegal stop and searches, literally kills people of color, and literally gets violent towards anyone that is protesting, we think that a sanctuary city or a safe place for these people to go is necessary to show that the country is on a trajectory of doing good. A couple of points of framing. What's the problem right now? ICE is massively overexpanding its reach in unconstitutional ways. Firstly, by baiting immigrants and undocumented workers with subpoenas like snitches of the police or even arresting their friends, and without due cause, because they're able to bait them into coming into public areas into their site. But secondly, they're cracking down and being aggressive towards protesters. This is really bad because the protesters are just trying to protect basic human rights. And what do we stand behind here? Let's be clear. We stand behind cities, but this is already happening. We would note it's happening pretty well in these areas. Mamdani has just become mayor of New York. LA's protests have become significantly down in recent times as a direct result of the public backlash of the most privileged getting their messaging and direct support out of.
Clarification.
No, thank you. What does this look like? This looks like a higher burden of proof for arrest, which means that if I want to claim that there are some evil Pablo Escobars hiding in LA, we get them on our side anyways because you probably still have probable cause in these particular ways. It means you don't chase up undocumented immigrants and instead you conserve your resources towards like fighting and prosecuting actual criminals where you have actual proof of these kinds of things. And most crucially, there's just a change in narrative perception in these states of snitching on undocumented workers when you don't actually know for a fact that they are undocumented workers. So you reduce the amount of targeting that people have got to get in these states. 3 cases. Why this is going to be done well, why even if it's not having immigrants is good and necessary to keep them safe, and why this is the precursor to structural reform. Why is this likely to be done well? The premise here is simple. People believe in the legitimacy of, on our side, people believe in the legitimacy of immigration services and they opt into the state more with reporting crimes and voting. First reason this is true. The problem right now is a genuine inability to distinguish between immigrants and undocumented workers. And you know this to be true. Trump is an idiot and genuinely thinks we're eating dogs and cats. So if you have undocumented friends, they get baited into outing themselves if anything bad happens to you on the front lines of the protest. But secondly, in general, the kinds of states enacting this are more liberal. Firstly, because they grew up with more immigrants. The AIV knows that LA and New York have massive immigrant populations. Probably this contact theory means you humanize these people as real people who deserve to live. But secondly, you're just more skeptical of anti-immigration media. These are the kinds of states making fun of Trump's rhetoric, delegitimizing his power, and actively calling out on media. This was necessary for the kinds of elections that we care about on Gov, specifically for Mamdani, who's literally strongly left-wing, which shows a trajectory to these areas becoming more liberal in a way that is good. But thirdly, there's a stronger and clearer messaging from your mayor or senior political office to support immigration. And this is the most crucial mech on messaging, right? Because the problem right now is that people are shifting towards the center, just general on the globe, right? So they're able to be complicit on issues like immigration, on like other political issues, and take a soft stance. When you're a sanctuary state, we think that you cannot take a soft stance, and crucially, you have to come out in support of immigration. This is really, really good because it reminds your voters, it reminds the immigrants and undocumented workers in your population that there is someone out there that is backing you within your electorate system, even despite all of the horrible things that other people are saying about you in other states and in other political offices. The impact is simple. There's greater education, knowledge, and social consciousness on how to get the right paper and necessarily to carry them around with you in instances, even if you are stop and search on the comparative. We think that this kind of education saves people from the worst instances. Second case, why even if this isn't ineffective, we think that having immigrants in major cities is good and is necessary to keep them safe. Firstly, obviously, they cover a wide diversity and variety of jobs. They fill holes in the labor market. They work incredibly hard and they're generally good Samaritans. Why? Because most religions and cultural practices not in the West preach charity. Many cultural festivals involve giving back. I literally give Indian food to my neighbors all the time during Diwali. We think this is a common cultural practice and all of these things. You know this to be true. Kelly Osbourne literally said that on that one interview show where she was like, well, who's going to clean the toilets, Donald Trump? We think this is crucial. But secondly, there's a greater meritocracy and quality of work. They're more diverse, they're like more resilient to struggles, and they're willing to work their way up a ladder because they don't feel entitled to success in the way that the average American citizen does. But thirdly, they're the most vulnerable group generally in a state, and obviously your state is only as strong as the most vulnerable actors within it. Firstly, most of these people are structurally locked out of economic opportunity without sanctuary states or without being on a trajectory to being more liberal. Why is this true? First, because they're often oppressed and fear-mongered in the media, or through elderly citizens that have lived through the horrible experiences and past of the American state. But most importantly, they fear for their futures in a Trump presidency. As much as the indoctrination has maybe worked in swing states towards people of color, this is disanalogous from the kinds of undocumented workers and immigrants we're talking about that would otherwise have trust in the state, that would otherwise believe that Democrats are on their side. But lastly, this is America's biggest claim to fame, land of the free. So messaging is obviously the first logical step because you need counterbalances to horrible narratives perpetuating like nationally to feel safer within your own community. If your own people don't back you, no one else will. The upshot of this is simple. When your country goes to shit, you have a stable labor force and on comparative, you have better narratives in the areas that they live. I'll take closing if they have anything.
Don't you think that the extreme measures used are a result of the inability to use traditional measures by the fact that sanctuary cities are doing everything possible to prevent you from using them?
I don't think they're doing everything that they can. I think it's a shock that Trump has actually acted on his promises. I think they're reacting to a sudden shock in the unconstitutional nature of this. We've already proven why we're on a trajectory to getting better. Lastly, why is this the precursor to structural reform? Preempting OP. OP may say that we get less funding for detention centers, and that's bad, but I think this is a wash for two reasons. Firstly, because per the info slide, we're the side that arrests less people, so there's less understaffing in these detention centers in the first place. But secondly, because our first case already proves why more people opt into getting documentation and this is more accessible for people and they have it at the same time. At least if you're being processed for documentation, you won't get arrested because you're considered guilty. Secondly, they might say that information sharing is ineffective in status quo. But we want to flip this in two ways. Firstly, at least your racist neighbors aren't ratting you out anywhere near as much. But secondly, at least police are divesting resources into actual criminals in the first place. The weighing is simple. To fight against a tyrannical leader, you need heaps of amounts of evidence to impeach him. We think that when this is actively unconstitutional towards the specific laws of your state, that is the point at which you can actually delegitimize any narratives that fight against undocumented workers. We protect the most vulnerable. I know this is woke nonsense, but we actually just win on empirics.
I thank that speaker for that fine speech and welcome the leader of the opposition to begin their speech and welcome the member of government to begin this closing half.
Okay. There are very few people that can be called Native American. The US, and specifically cities who have benefited from migrants the most, have a moral obligation to uphold for them being immigrants in the first place, thus allowing illegal immigration in their own city. But before that, what is the gigantic problem with Top Half? OWO points out that OG has a gigantic failure in capacity, i.e., why can the sanctuary cities in the first place protect these people? They say that the federal state is too big to protect them. And CG will going to prove to you why you have the capacity to protect immigrants. 3 reasons why that's the case. 1, these cities actively provide lawyers to these immigrants. This is like the #1 program that Mandami has. These lawyers would never be accessible otherwise to these immigrants because they don't have enough money to do so. These lawyers do not do pro bono cases because it's likely controversial cases. Therefore, it is the only means of legal defense they have. Second of all, these cities have the largest police force in the US. Literally, New York City Police Department has fucking submarines, but not only that, is like the third biggest police force, like I think it's bigger than most countries, okay? This means that it's able to protect them. But thirdly, these cities have immense amount of money. Literally, they control the GDP of the US. Therefore, whatever they do, they're able to fund these court cases to the death because they want to protect the citizens. But then, OO might say, oh, but the federal government is bigger and they will fund things better. Three things on that. One, Republicans have an active political cost in doing so. This is because they have a libertarian wing that believes in states' rights. This is, no thank you, in the chat. This is people like Rand Paul, etc., that the Republican Party relies on to vote for policies like the Big Beautiful Bill. The problem...
Like, because you do POIs when you're open.
You're unmuted, bro.
Sorry.
Yeah. They rely on these policies to pass through the House through this libertarian wing. This wing gets pissed off whenever you violate states' rights because it goes against their core ideology. Therefore, you have a running political cost where you're doing ICE raids against a state that is against this stuff. Therefore, the Republicans cannot maintain federal violation of the states' rights because they will fuck over their own voting bloc internally in the parliament. But second of all, there are cheaper ways of then easing anti-immigrant sentiment by going to other states and kicking the immigrants there. Therefore, these states don't have any, these states actively protect them. But then, why this thing is the most important thing in the debate? Two things. One, OG is heavily reliant on proving capacity on you protecting these immigrants. The way you get those benefits of you like having like these illegal immigrants being able to live is by being able to protect them in the first place. But second of all, this specifically increases cost in the long term to have anti-immigrant policy in these states. Therefore, you are forced to find other reasons and other solutions to this, like potentially granting them more documentation and legal work in order for them to become proper citizens. So it actively costs less to the federal state the moment that these sanctuary states exist. It is an active incentive then to provide documentation. Okay. Why is it inhumane to not have these sanctuary cities? OG says that these are the most vulnerable stakeholders, but three things on that. One, they don't have access to a fair trial. The way that the US deports people is, yes, by dragging them en masse and sending them to RICO facilities in El Salvador with literally no due process. This, if OO cares about the law, this is probably the biggest violation of the law that can be, because you cannot even check if they're an illegal immigrant, and therefore you're also sending US citizens and legal immigrants there. But second of all, you're sending them back to way worse dangerous situations, like Salvador, which has active gang members and active like gangs that exist in the street. Okay, but then OO says, and CO, they say, oh, but these restrictions are insanely violent because of these states and cities. Three reasons why that's not the case. One, the way and the reason that these restrictions were massively limited in the US is because of 9/11 and terrorism panic. This is due to like them having an active fear of immigrants. This is way before the detention of immigrants from the US. Therefore, we believe that anti-racist sentiment existed before. Second of all, there is a massively militarized police in the US. This is because there is a military industrial complex that funds this. Therefore, there is an active incentive then to be violent towards immigrants, independent of whether the sanctuary states exist or not. And this is where OO case fails, because OO case would work if these policies were only used in New York City and LA. But guess what? They're fucking not. They're going to be used in Colorado. They're actively used in Texas. Therefore, the amount of self-defense you do against these restrictions does not increase the violence you get for them. It is the exact opposite. The moment you have an active cost in enacting these restrictions, it's the moment then that you have to find different ways of providing cheaper alternatives like documentation. What does this mean? This means that in closing government then, we provide the reason why in the long term you have better regulation towards immigration that is more friendly to immigrants. But secondly, you have an active capacity to protect these people, thus getting OG benefits. But why do we care about immigrants more than anyone else in this debate? We think, one, the native US population has an active principal obligation to protect these immigrants. This is because, specifically, they were born from immigrant families. They directly benefited from a stay in the US that had laxed visas, and therefore, it is their duty to provide to other people these visas, or at least protect them while they're in the process of getting them. Before so, OO.
You have no grounding to take a case to court when your client has done the crime of illegal immigration. And unless you want the NYPD to start shooting at ICE, I don't know how you're protecting them.
But
Your case
you
is
have to
literally-
prove first that they're illegal immigrant. The way that you do that is by getting them to court and showing that their documentation. Most of the illegal immigrants are not actively illegal. They're in the process of finding documentation, and therefore, no, bro, you get them to court. What you do is deport them to El Salvador and die. Okay. Lastly, on crime and immigration, the racist bullshit that OO says. One, illegal immigrants commit less crime, not because of the vague OG narratives that they talk about. It is because they're actively afraid of deportation. Therefore, they're less likely to go to do crimes because they don't want to have contact with police officers. This is why the native population does way more crimes. Therefore, the moment that you deport the citizens, you don't do anything to actively do this. What you actually do is that you restrain the budget of these officers to do and go take over the actual criminals that exist in the US that are doing them. Okay. Lastly, why do we beat opening government? We think one, opening government does a brilliant job in providing why these illegal immigrants are like at risk and stuff. We think that this is the easiest analysis to do. The harder analysis to do in this debate is why you actively protect them. The moment you cost the US state more to fuck them over, it's the moment that every US state is harder for them to deport. The moment you have less detention centers, it is the moment that they fill up to capacity and you cannot detain more people. Vote CG.
I thank that speaker for that fine speech, and now I welcome the opposition member to begin their team's case.
Okay, I feel like you can keep the recording. Oh, they're not recording. I mean, I want to watch that speech again in the future. Maybe with joy, maybe with regret. Okay. Starting in 3, 2, 1. The first thing I want to explain is why this is not done excessively. And I want you as a panel to ask yourself, did they provide actual political reasons, or did they selectively highlight stories from The Guardian and CNN on specific, most scandalous cases that affect 50 migrants at most and don't highlight the average illegal migrant in that country? 4 reasons as to why this is not done excessively. The first one is that voters in America currently have a revealed preference that they care about the economy the most. Trump was elected solely because he would increase the economical output, reduce inflation, and reduce prices, which means every single migrant that was actually a net positive for the economy is something that could hurt the economy, which is why you don't want to be doing this. Secondly, the US is currently in the midst of a trade war. It cannot rely on exports as much or comparatively less than before. This means they are trying to bring up their domestic industries. This is why they're increasing projects for agricultural construction and fracking, which means in the vast majority of cases, they are hiring migrants and they are selectively increasing the visas for migrants that are qualified to do it in that particular regard. Thirdly, if you excessively do this and threaten legal migrants or people in the process of becoming legal, this means you could be losing political votes. In many cases, Latin Americans, Africans, and Hispanics are major swing groups that are politically undecided or politically fluid, which means they could decide elections. This is why Trump voted like 3 out of the 6 swing states in the last election. Fourthly, the US has a long-term pragmatic desire to have a war of migration simply because they have declining birth rates. Check it out in Google, 1.7, below the replacement rate. This is why, factually, there are thousands of migrants every single month pouring into the country, legally approved of. What is the bottom line of this claim? So many people are going into that country. There are legal and pragmatic reasons to allow them. If we don't allow somebody, that means we have reached our capacity. Now, if this will not be done excessively, let's go on to the positive case. I will do what opening opposition did not dare to do. Run the actual hardline case as to why those illegal migrants hurt the economy. 4 reasons as to why this is the case. The first one is those illegal migrants create a significant race to the bottom in terms of wages. The problem that OG highlights of people not wanting jobs is because they don't want to work for pennies. because the minimum wage is not changing and they don't want to work for a starvation wage. Why is there a race to the bottom? Those migrants have zero leverage to negotiate a salary, simply because in the vast majority of cases, the employer could threaten to spell on them and to get them deported. The threat itself means that they accept the lowest wage possible. Secondly, since they're inherently more risky because they may change location, you don't know their background and their qualifications, you accept a lower wage. This is a problem because now the employer compares with every other American, and also migrants are competing with one another, which means artificially the livable wage goes significantly down for every single American in this state by virtue of them basically accepting wage slavery and accepting the lowest possible wage. Second reason, and CG kind of agrees with that, the state is likely to spend significant amount of resources on them. There are two aspects in that regard. The first one is those migrants are not paying taxes. They're not positively contributing. In the vast majority of cases, they're either A, saving their money because they want to have enough money in case they get deported and to bring back to the family, B, or using the money externally to give back to the people within their own country, or C, not paying any taxes at all. They're not contributing towards social security, payroll taxes, income taxes, or anything in that particular regard. So they're not paying taxes, but also they're a state burden. Even if the state supports you, this means guaranteed food stamps, guaranteed housing, guaranteed education, guaranteed support and checks through healthcare. So this is one aspect that is costing significant amounts of money. But this is the weaker one. The more important one is as follows. They themselves concede there are going to be significant legal battles, which means if every single migrant has a different background, a different story, a different set of circumstances, this means you're literally fighting tens of thousands legal cases. New York right now has, and you can check it yourself, more than 5,000 ongoing legal cases with the federal government. This is literally costing billions of dollars for them to fight. Every single battle is public money being wasted. Thirdly, let's accept a reasonable case that maybe you could feasibly house some illegal migrants. The problem is this motion is not that every single US state becomes a sanctuary state, but that specific states, like 5 or 6, are becoming sanctuary states. And what does that mean? Migrants preferentially migrate to them from other continents, or when they feel threatened in one state, they go to those sanctuary states, which means the concentration of a huge amount of migrants, specifically within those few states within the United States, creates an overwhelming problem. Even if you don't buy the analysis that the presence of some migrants in a state would overwhelm social systems, you have to concede, as they themselves concede, that the concentration of migrants worthy of 50 states into 7 states leads to a significant amount of economical drain. Before I continue, opening.
This extension is logically inconsistent. Silicon Valley workers overstay their visas all the time, but there's no recourse and they're good for the economy. Presumably, you're just targeting poor people of color.
This is just asserted. Why would they overstate it? Why wouldn't the employer and the federal government have an incentive to automatically renew their visa because they don't want to lose them to China or to Europe or any other nation? Just a pure assertion. Fourth reason, the fight with the federal government creates economical negative externalities. California lost on billions in wildfire management because Trump selectively withheld resources and delayed resources giving simply because he was upset at them for fighting. So they're doing a war of attrition that is costing the lives of the average person, which means you're defunding them, you're raising their taxes, you're not involving them in multi-state infrastructural projects, you're withholding money that is required for the renewal of infrastructure that would create jobs and bring money to the local economy. Why should you care for this? A, this is the claim that affects every single person on the ground, not only migrants that will also be hurt by the economy going worse, but also the average American. Secondly, I'm not sure why I should not care for the average American. 30% of Americans are paycheck to paycheck with credit cards maxed out. 5% of them are homeless. They're also poor. They're also scared. And this is why they voted for those illegal migrants to be reduced and for the economy to be better. They did not consent to this, but the migrants consented into going to America. So on all those grounds, oppose.
I thank that speaker for that fine speech and welcome the government whip to conclude the government bench.
I'm audible? All right, give me a sec. One of the biggest pushes OO does is they tell you that like federal state will do aggressive measures against you if you continue doing this. Pangais gives you already good reasons why this is not true, such as that you can defend against US forces because you're a powerful state. But secondly, this is not only on a military level, you also control the narrative and economic power because you're one of the main contributors to the US economy. And note that US is largely state-led, it is non-federal. That means that a lot of power is kept to these states. We are unsure why even if the federal guard is stronger, that it can do much to affect these states. But thirdly, there is also an aspect on the immigrants themselves. By providing a sanctuary to them, we can allow lawyers to these illegal immigrants, which means that it is easier to defend yourself giving the status. And finally, also note the following thing. Their libertarian voter base, when it comes to conservatives, tends to be pro-status. Like they tend to be anti-immigrants as well, but like the core issues that you're pro-state against the federal power. That means that the longer you keep doing this, the worse the incentive is for the libertarian voter group to keep voting for you. So there's not a long-run benefit to this. Now, they also tell you that there's incentives to allow legal immigration because they're so beneficial to the economy. This is not true because they cannot, under the status quo, they cannot allow to do so. One, because of the existing infrastructure, because of high bureaucracy, and there's huge challenges in order to get to there in the first place, also because of the police. But secondly, because the narrative of anti-immigration right now is rising, and which is intensifying these effects. But thirdly, we can flip this because the second we allow more illegal immigration, we can allow more of these immigrants to actually opt into this process and hopefully get more illegal immigrants too. But on the points, lastly, on like, oh, illegal immigration bad because it's illegal. Legality doesn't equal good. Like slavery was also legal at some point, right? Then also Pangais explains to you why like they're unlikely to affect like other states, but just to reemphasize this. They're not going to float to the other parts of the country because they're afraid to be deported over there because they don't have such benefits to themselves as they do in the sanctuary states. And they're usually trying to get the process done because they're afraid, again, of deportation because they want to keep the benefits of living in this. But even if illegal immigration occurs, we tell you this is good and we tell you that there is a moral obligation to them, which I'll weigh a little bit later. Then there is the point on like how Trump voters tend to want these policies. This is shown because he turned more radical after winning. They don't prove to you that the voters decided this, as opposed to just the politicians. I can tell you the opposite is true. Why? Because the second Trump became more anti-immigrant, riots started increasing to a significant higher extent, and lower support of Trump occurred even in the conservative base. But thirdly, on why this is true, because he's changing the narrative, such as, for example, in Project 25, when he said that this is not how it's going to go, but now he's kind of more pro this. So he keeps changing the narrative, and he keeps losing his voter base. So we do not know why this is true, that his voters like the anti-immigration policies. Now, on the opening clash itself, like there is a big point on anti-immigration sentiment. We can tell you that this is like a complete wash at best for opposition, but we can also outframe it a bit better. The main reason there is anti-immigration sentiment is because like it starts with the falling quality of life, mainly because of economic outcomes. So what happens then is we like to blame somebody, and immigrants are the easiest topic because of the status and all of those controversial issues. And who controls that? The media. Why are they the main ones? Because they have the most money and they have a strong voter base they want to keep. So if they're anti-immigrant to start with, such as Fox News, they're going to continue being anti-immigrant, especially in times of crisis. This increases anytime a crisis occurs and can fucks over immigrants. Note that this is a better mechanization than OG gives you because it works even prior to Trump winning. Because we explained to you that like the economic narrative, like the economic crisis leads to more anti-immigrant policies, and this is true why Trump led to the win in the first place. But also, this also clashes with the CEO that tell you like, but people voted for it. Why the fuck did people vote for it? We don't know any proof of this. Also, OO's case, entire one, is a huge burden because we do not know why the anti-immigration sentiment comes specifically from sanctuary states, not other factors like the economic factors declining, right? So why has there been a recent rise in this? Because Trump won an inflation crisis. So that note that this means the following: because he's increasing his narrative on anti-immigration, asylum is affected anyways, regardless of the immigration narrative. But to prove this even more, I can flip it by saying that there is less polarization. Why? Because it's businesses that control the main narrative, because they have the highest capacity from their lobbying power, and the fact that they're in these sanctuary cities. That means that in the sanctuary cities, they're more likely to be pro-immigration, but in the cities where they do not see these benefits, they're more likely to be anti. So they're the ones controlling the incentive. Know that this is also a better mech than opening governments saying like, oh, like you know the immigrant person a bit better because you're closer to them. It is the businesses that control the politics because they have the strongest lobby by far. And if the policies of sanctuary states are pro-immigrant, it is exactly because the businesses support them. Now, before I move on to OG, can I take opening?
The reason we know Trump is cracking down due to popular support and polarization is that he literally campaigned on this as a main issue and explicitly mentioned sanctuary states in his
No,
speech.
his main issue was literally, I'll decrease the price of eggs. I do not see proof on your side why this is true. I give you alternative reasons. All right, on opening government, we explained to you that we're more effective because first of all, there is the business owner's incentive, like why they benefit the local businesses specifically. But we also tell you that there is like a significant capability of these states to do so because they can defend against the federal power, which opening government doesn't claim to that extent. On the main weighing, even if at best opening government proves to the immigrant workers increase economic benefits, we care about human rights of illegal immigrants the most because they suffered the most, because they've been through the poorest backgrounds, and the benefits to them are insane compared to the marginal benefits of some product improvements. Secondly, this trickles down on the citizens themselves. The second we allow for more due process on everybody is the second the citizens themselves are more protected. And this is also, again, on illegal immigrants, there's the greatest harm if motion is opposed. So there's but there is also a principal argument, which I'll get to, but let me move on to CO. CO is backstabbing OO. OO says the measures have become violent. Therefore, CO is knifing the moment they say that these policies are not excessive in the status quo, right? Now, on the job point, they're not affecting the job market of the white-collar workers. Why? Because they're only doing the blue-collar jobs, which were vacant in the first place. Additionally, we flip this the moment they become legal because they can no longer raise to the bottom. But also on the union point, how you cannot no longer negotiate prices, businesses have a union breaking down narrative anyway, so we don't see how this is true. Also, they tell you that you're trying to increase domestic profits, domestic production. This is exactly why you need illegal immigration in the first place, especially because of your low birth rates. So we have a higher need. Also, in the welfare, they are not receiving welfare. They're also contributing to taxes because IRS is not a police, and they're afraid that they're going to be deported if they don't contribute. So they do contribute to the taxes, but they don't contribute to the extent of social welfare. I'm very proud to propose. Always closing government.
I thank the speaker for their fine speech and welcome the opposition whip to conclude this debate.